What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Nail That Tone, a series that's all about helping you guys achieve some of the most legendary guitar tones of all time. In this week's episode, we're talking about Metallica's Death Magnetic, a pretty classic album at this point. A lot of cool stuff to talk about, as always, so let's get right into it. As always with the Nail That Tone series, the first thing we're talking about is finger tone. Now for finger tone this week, there isn't too much to talk about other than you have to keep in mind that because of James Hetfield's amazing ability to just write really cool riffs, he does add some kind of just riffage that's pretty hard to play at first because if you're not in good down picking shape, you will find this riff challenging. So just keep that in mind that there are parts where we have to downstroke a lot and there's times where we alternate pick. So just keep that in mind if you're going for the most authentic cover of this song, because there are times where, again, we alternate pick and there are times where we just down pick. So now we're talking about what gear was used on this particular album. Now the great thing about this album is that we do have some really good information from James Hetfield himself. The information itself is a little bit vague, but using a little bit of detective work, when we really analyze the sort of documentary that Metallica made of the making of this album, we can get a little bit of a better idea of some of the amplifiers that they likely use on this record. So my source when it comes to this information is really just a Guitar World article that James Hetfield did. So James Hetfield does give us some good information, and I'll link the website in the description. So there are clearly some amps that are mentioned. The first amp is an Ampeg type amplifier. It's not too specific as to which one. And then we also get some information that, again, James Hetfield used his Mark II C+. And we also get James Hetfield saying that the Triaxis was used as well. And I recommend checking out the documentary of the making of this album. In that documentary, you can see Metallica just talking a lot about the songwriting process, as well as just a lot of the gear that they had around the time. You do see in the documentary a lot of diesel amplifiers as well as some crank amplifiers as well. So these are possible amps that may have been used again to create that blend that James Hetfield mentions in the article. And when it comes to the guitars they use, I think checking out that documentary will give us a lot of good kind of insight to the guitars they had at the time and the guitars that they were playing during the tracking process of this particular album. I believe the same thing would apply if we were talking about cabinets. I would certainly recommend checking out that documentary and seeing what kind of cabinets they were using at the time. Looks like, of course, a Marshall and Mesa, your typical kind of brands, but there were some more obscure stuff, and it's all in the documentary. It's super long, but it's definitely worth checking out if you're into that kind of stuff. So now we're talking about the gear that I used to get the tone that you guys heard in the beginning of the video. Now I did use a combination of different things. I essentially, instead of using a combination of 4 or 5 different amps or whatever Metallica may have used, I just used a combination of 2 things. One of them was one of my Mark II C pluses in my collection, and the other combination was a diesel sort of amp model from my Axe-Fx 3, and I ran both of them through the same IR. So nothing too complicated when it comes to the amp side of things of what I used. It really ended up being a blend of both amplifiers, and I think I did mix in a little bit more of the diesel sound more than the 2C Plus, just because I feel that the diesel sound is just more present in the song, at least to my ears. And when it comes to guitars, I just use my Ibanez Gem Jr. Nothing special there, again, stock pickups and everything, so nothing too complicated really when it comes to the gear that I used. So now we're talking about what other gear you could use to get a similar tone if you're on a budget, or we're talking about just different type of gear that's more accessible to your average player. I would certainly recommend just getting some of the kind of cheaper but sort of high gain amplifiers. I'm thinking kind of PV 6505, some of the EVH stuff, if you can still find that stuff pretty cheap, is certainly amplifiers I would recommend, or some of the kind of lower end Mesa Boogie amps as well would certainly give you something similar. And of course you could also blend some different amps and kind of come up with your own combination that sounds similar to the album. But I would just say something pretty high gain, of course, since we're talking about Mesa and possibly diesel amps. I mean, these are some higher gain amplifiers, so I would just recommend something in that higher gain structure would get you a very similar sound for a much lower price. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for this episode. We cannot continue to make these episodes without your support, so please consider subscribing, leave a like, comment, and hopefully, guys, we will see you guys in the next video.